They surrounded her before anyone understood what was happening. 4 men in dusty fatigues, boots grinding into the gravel of the training yard, their shadows falling over her like a closing trap. The afternoon sun burned through the haze, shaping everything in sharp, unforgiving edges. And in the middle of that tightening circle stood Aria Lane, quiet, still, with her hands half raised as if caught off guard. But she wasn't, not even close. The onlookers sensed something wrong long before the soldiers did. It was in the way Aria's eyes never flickered with fear, in how her breathing didn't change, in how she measured every angle of escape without moving a single muscle. But the soldiers, new recruits intoxicated by the idea of dominance, mistook her silence for submission. They whispered to each other, convinced she was just some civilian liaison who had wandered too far into their territory. Someone they could provoke, someone easy to corner. One of them stepped closer, his boots stopping inches from her toes. The air between them tightened. The gravel shifted beneath her feet, hinting at what she already knew: no one here would defend her. Not yet. The bystanders watched with held breaths, recognizing the crackle of moral injustice, but frozen by uncertainty. Aria's gaze remained calm, almost too calm, and that unsettled the oldest instinct in the crowd. Something ancient told them she was not what they thought. Something whispered that danger moved quietly, not loudly, and that true power never demanded attention. It simply existed. The soldier closest to her leaned in, trying to intimidate her with his size. His shadow swallowed the delicate line of her jaw. "What's a soft little civilian doing in our zone?" he muttered, loud enough for others to hear. The ridicule carried weight, an invitation for the others to join him. A few chuckled, a few looked away, a few waited to see what she would do. Aria didn't speak, she didn't frown. She didn't shift. She simply watched him, the way a surgeon watches the motion of a blade before making the decisive cut. Her stillness irritated him more than any insult could have, so he stepped even closer, testing the invisible boundary she kept around herself. No one knew that boundary was life or death, no one but her. A gust of wind rolled across the yard, carrying the scent of sand, oil, and simmering tension. The recruits hadn't realized they were provoking the wrong woman. They hadn't realized the silence before them was not fear. It was calculation. Precision, control sharpened by years of warfare most of them could not imagine. Someone from the back of the crowd whispered, "She doesn't look scared." Another replied, "Maybe she should be." But Aria didn't need to be told what they thought of her. She had seen that look her entire life, men measuring her by her size, her softness, her quiet way of moving. Then the soldier closest to her lightly tapped her shoulder with 2 fingers, mockingly dismissive, unaware that he had just triggered a rule she lived by. No one touches her without consent. Ever, her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time there was a shift, not anger, not panic, but something infinitely more dangerous: permission. Not for him, but for herself. Aria finally spoke, her voice low enough that only those closest could hear, but the words carved through the tension like a blade through silk. "Before you take another step," she murmured, "remember something." The soldier sneered, "And what's that?" She took a slow breath, letting the truth settle like iron. "I'm a SEAL combat master." The yard fell silent, but the soldiers didn't laugh because they sensed no exaggeration, no bluff, no desperate claim in her tone. It wasn't pride, it wasn't arrogance, it was simply the truth. And suddenly everyone realized too late that they had backed a predator into a corner, convinced she was prey. The silence that followed her words wasn't empty. It pulsed, alive and trembling, as if the ground itself braced for what would come next. The circle around her wavered, not out of fear yet, but out of disbelief. The recruits exchanged glances, unable to reconcile the calm woman before them with the title she had just spoken. A SEAL combat master. It sounded impossible, absurd even. Their world had taught them to identify threats through noise, size, arrogance. But Aria possessed none of those. She was quiet, compact, reserved, the kind of person men like them dismissed before they even finished the thought. But the truth carried weight, and even the arrogant felt its pressure. The oldest of the four, broad-shouldered, confident, and too used to getting his way, forced a smirk to hide the unease curling in his gut. "I seal her right, and I'm king of the world." He stepped closer again, testing her resolve, testing his luck, testing fate without realizing how unforgiving it could be. Aria didn't move, didn't blink, didn't break the fragile stillness. Her heartbeat barely rose. She had been in ambush zones where silence was a weapon sharper than any blade. She had stared down men with far darker intentions than these misguided recruits, and she had survived because she knew when to move and when to become the storm. One of the younger soldiers shuffled anxiously. He had heard whispers of a female operator whose combat record was sealed under layers of clearance. Stories told in low voices about missions that had never existed on paper. Nothing confirmed, but nothing denied either. His fingers twitched as he remembered them, and for a brief moment he wondered if he should step back. But the others didn't see the warning signs. They saw only what they wanted to see: fragility, softness, a woman alone. Aria watched their misjudgment wrap around them like a shroud, knowing they were seconds away from consequences they hadn't imagined. The leader reached out again, this time with a touch that implied ownership, the kind that had broken lesser spirits in other corners of the world. His fingers hovered near her arm, intending to push, to force, to prove something to the crowd and to himself. He never got the chance. Aria shifted, barely perceptible, her movement flowing like water, disturbed by a single breath. No sharp jerk, no visible aggression, just a transition so fluid it seemed almost gentle. Her hand caught his wrist before he even felt her touch, and in that softness lived the quiet promise of devastation. The crowd didn't hear a single sound. There was no snap, no grunt, no theatrical display. Just the sudden realization that the soldier who had towered over her was now on one knee. His arm twisted behind him in a hold so controlled, it looked like she was merely guiding him rather than subduing him. He gasped, not from pain, but from the horrifying clarity that she had allowed him to stand this long. The other three froze. Aria's voice was steady, carrying no triumph, no mockery. "You misunderstand strength," she said softly, almost mournfully, as if she regretted the lesson she was forced to give. "You confuse noise with power." The soldier beneath her trembled, eyes wide with a fear he had never known. He could feel she wasn't hurting him, not yet, but the precision of her hold told him she could dismantle him in a heartbeat. Another soldier lunged, driven by panic rather than bravery. His fist shot forward, clumsy with adrenaline. Aria released the first recruit and pivoted with a grace that seemed impossible in combat. She sidestepped the strike, her body gliding past him like a passing shadow, and with a single controlled motion, she redirected his momentum. He stumbled forward, crashing into the gravel and sliding to a stop, stunned by how little effort she had needed. The remaining two hesitated, finally grasping the danger before them. Their breaths quickened, their bravado cracked. And yet the weight of the crowd watching trapped them in the expectation of action. Their pride, fragile and inflated, pushed them forward even as instinct screamed at them to retreat. Aria stood in the center of their fear, calm, steady, unshaken. Her presence didn't grow. It deepened, like the ocean revealing its true depth only when storm winds tear across its surface. Her eyes settled on the last two. "Walk away," she said. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a plea, it was a chance, one they didn't deserve, but one she still offered. They should have taken it. They didn't take it. Pride is a stubborn poison, slow to enter, quick to consume, and the two remaining recruits were drowning in it now. The crowd watched with a tension so thick it felt like a physical presence, pressing against the air, holding everything in place. No one spoke, no one breathed too loudly, The wrong outcome felt inevitable, as if the world itself had stepped back to witness the consequences of arrogance. The third soldier stepped forward first. His jaw clenched, shoulders squared. He moved not from courage but from humiliation. The second followed a heartbeat later, though hesitation clung to every step. Their boots scraped against the gravel, announcing their decisions with each grinding shift of weight. Aria observed them with a gaze neither sharp nor cold, just profoundly, heart-breakingly disappointed. She looked at them as one might look at people who had no idea how close they stood to danger, who mistook mercy for weakness. The first man lunged. It wasn't a calculated attack, just a wild, desperate reach meant to overwhelm her through sheer size. But she moved before he even touched her shadow. Her pivot was a whisper of motion, her fingers brushing his wrist to guide him past her, redirecting all his strength into emptiness. He stumbled, unbalanced, and she helped him the rest of the way with a gentle pressure at his shoulder. He hit the ground, not violently, but with enough force to rob him of whatever confidence he had left. The fourth soldier froze. His eyes darted between his fallen comrades, and something deep within him finally cracked. His breath trembled. He had believed strength was loud, explosive, unrestrained. But everything she did, every shift, every movement showed a different truth. Real strength was silent, precise, and terrifyingly controlled. But humiliation is a dangerous fuel. He rushed her anyway. Aria didn't dodge this time. She stepped into his momentum, shortening the distance between them in an instant. Her palm pressed lightly against his chest, nothing more than a gentle, intentional touch. Yet the angle, the timing, the placement were perfect. His body locked, knees buckling as his center of gravity collapsed inward. He fell at her feet, breath knocked out of him. She placed 2 fingers against his shoulder, holding him down with the same pressure one might use to keep a page from turning in the wind. And somehow, impossibly, he couldn't rise. The yard was silent, 4 men down, a crowd breathless, and at the center of it all, Aria stood without a single crease in her composure. But power wasn't what she radiated. Clarity was. A quiet clarity born of years in shadows, of missions she could never speak of battles where hesitation meant death. She didn't revel in this moment. She didn't enjoy it. It wasn't victory, it was necessity. She stepped back, giving them space to rise if they could. The one at her feet pushed himself up on trembling arms, shame burning through him hotter than fear. Aria watched him with an expression that held no triumph, only the weight of truth. "You came at me with aggression you didn't understand," she said, her voice low, steady, unshaken. "And you believed that made you strong." Her words carried across the yard, reaching every ear. Strength isn't about overpowering someone weaker. It's about protecting those who can't defend themselves. It's about knowing when not to fight. One of the recruits looked away, jaw tight, pride collapsing under the truth she was revealing. Another stared at the ground, ashamed yet unable to process the lesson fully. Aria took a slow breath, letting the silence absorb the gravity of her words. Memories flickered inside her. Dusty roads in foreign lands, nights illuminated by gunfire, operators who never made it home. She didn't want to be feared. She didn't want to be worshipped. She wanted them to understand that violence wasn't a toy, and strength wasn't a weapon for ego. The oldest recruit, still shaken, finally found his voice. "Why didn't you finish us? You could have." His voice cracked not from pain, but from the dawning realization of how badly they had misjudged her. Aria met his gaze. "I don't fight to win," she said softly. "I fight to end danger, and you were never the danger." The words landed with a deeper impact than any strike. The soldiers looked at her differently now, not as a threat, not as someone to dominate, but as something far more humbling, a mirror reflecting their own flaws. Before they could respond, a stern voice cut across the yard, one of authority, one that froze every spine. It belonged to someone who had seen what happened, someone who knew exactly who Aria Lane was. And he was walking toward them now. The footsteps approached with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each step drawing the crowd tighter into a coil of anticipation. The recruits straightened instinctively, every muscle snapping to attention, as if their bodies remembered discipline, even when their pride momentarily hadn't. The whispers died away, even the air seemed to still. Colonel Reeves entered the circle, a tall man with graying temples and a scar running along the side of his jaw. He carried an authority that needed no words. His eyes swept across the scene, the fallen men, the stunned onlookers, and finally Aria, who stood calm and centered, as if she had expected his arrival long before he appeared. The recruits shifted uneasily under his gaze, shame painting their faces in uneven strokes. Reeves paused, letting the tension breathe, letting every person in the yard feel the weight of what they had just witnessed. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, controlled, but edged with something sharp. "Do any of you have the slightest idea," he said, "who you just tried to corner?" Silence answered him. The young men stood rigid, their humiliation deepening. Reeves exhaled slowly, a disappointed, tired sound that carried years of experience behind it. "This woman," he continued, gesturing toward Aria without taking his eyes off the soldiers, "has more confirmed high-risk extractions than any operator I've ever commanded. She's walked into impossible missions and brought teams home that should have never survived." Aria's expression didn't change. Praise had never been her goal. Recognition had never been her desire. But the recruits paled, realizing the enormity of their mistake. Reeves stepped closer to them, lowering his voice. "You thought she was a civilian liaison wandering where she didn't belong? She's the reason half of you even have a training yard to stand in." The words hit harder than any strike Aria had delivered. The youngest recruit winced, moisture gathering at the corner of his eyes as the truth dug into him. Pride had blinded them, now accountability laid them bare. Reeves looked at Aria then, and in his stern gaze was something few ever saw respect. Not the ceremonial kind handed out in speeches, but the quiet kind earned in shadows, in decisions no one else could carry, in nights where only one steady mind kept a team alive. "You didn't hurt them," he said quietly. "You could have, but you didn't." Aria shrugged softly. "They're not enemies, just boys who haven't learned what real strength is yet." Her words diffused the tension with a reluctant grace. The recruits lowered their heads, no longer in fear, but in understanding. There was no gloating in her voice, no bitterness, just truth spoken with the calm of someone who'd walked through far darker storms than their arrogance. Colonel Reeves turned to them. "You will apologize," he said, not a suggestion, an order. One by one, the soldiers stepped forward. Their apologies were quiet, strained, clumsy even, but sincere. Aria accepted each one with a small nod, her demeanor unchanged, still composed, still steady, still impossibly gentle despite the power she'd just displayed. But the moment one of them whispered, "We didn't know," Aria stopped him with a slight raise of her hand. "You shouldn't need to know someone's rank," she said, her voice carrying across the yard with a fragile, piercing honesty. "Respect isn't earned through power. It's given because every person deserves dignity until they use their strength to hurt others." The crowd felt those words echo long after her voice faded. Reeves watched her with a contemplative gaze, recognizing the deeper wounds beneath her calm. She had seen too much, done too much, lost too much, not for glory, not for recognition, but because she believed in protecting those who could not protect themselves. When the yard finally dispersed, the recruits lingered behind, still shaken, but now their eyes held something new: humility, and a quiet vow to carry the lesson she had given them. Aria stood alone for a moment, letting the wind wash over her. The sunlight dipped behind the clouds, softening the harsh edges of the day. She closed her eyes, not in exhaustion, but in reflection. She never sought confrontation, she only answered it when forced. And today, like so many days before, she had chosen restraint over dominance, mercy over pride. As she walked away, Reeves called after her, "Aria." She paused, glancing back. He gave a faint smile, one she rarely saw from him. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're still teaching lessons out here." Aria didn't smile, but something warm flickered in her eyes. "Someone has to." And with that, she continued down the quiet path, her footsteps soft but her presence unmistakable, leaving behind a yard full of men who would never again underestimate silence or confuse gentleness. With weakness, they would remember this day, they would remember her, and they would remember the words she spoke before the storm broke. "I'm a SEAL combat master."